Okay, so we are very glad that in Erasmus's speech, we finally got to what the crux of this debate is. Because ultimately, what we should be evaluating is the legitimacy of predicating, a political system upon religion. All the other things they tell us about how violence delegitimizes a movement and all of those things fall out. Let me just take that out before integrating the rest of my rebuttal. So, their point about violence is like the means illegitimizes, whatever it is that you are looking for. But ultimately recognize that violence and the means, the interrogation of the means and how it affects the legitimacy comes after you have interrogated the legitimacy of what it is you are looking for. So looking at Nkonsu Zizwe, for example, and the ANC in South Africa, ultimately we had to interrogate the legitimacy of the anti-apartheid struggle before we said, the NK and then the ANC and all of those things are illegitimate for using violence. Recognize that violence oftentimes only results after legitimate expressions like opening tell you have been stifled and oppression has resulted. So to the extent where they just say if there's no violence they are fine with it, recognize that they're basically a government light team, right? Because in the majority of instances movements for secession do not begin with violence. They ultimately begin to encroach onto violence when oppression has occurred, right? But why is it that when you oppress a legitimate demand, it is justified for that demand to utilize violence in response, right? Why is that legitimate? It is legitimate ultimately for all of us to resist evil. Let us all insert Bo's analysis about how we have a moral obligation to resist evil. This is very important because recognize that when you feel you are oppressed, when you have rights that are being trampled on, when majoritarian principles are being avoided, when ultimately the voice of the majority is being ignored because of Western-centric ideologies, we believe that it is very legitimate for you to use violence to overturn that oppression. To the extent that Boko Haram and ISIS have utilized violence, it has not illegitimized their claim to the extent that the majority support it, right? Three things I'll be giving in this speech. First, an interrogation of the ideological validity of predicating a state on Islam. Then secondly, asking the very important question, right? If religion is the basis of a political system and it causes all sorts of harms, which we think closing opposition will show us, right? If it causes all sorts of harms, should we still allow it occur? So if it's going to be something that is objectively provable by their side to be harmful, should we still allow it? Then finally, if the anticipated trauma is guaranteed and is legitimate, should we, have any moral responsibility to prevent that trauma if we think this political system is going to be a failure, right? These are very important things that you only get from closing government. So first, is it ideologically valid to predicate a state on Islam? Now, recognize that the orthodoxy of today, the mainstream ideology about how the only legitimate conception of a state is a liberal one, is a faulty one. This is an individualistic philosophical leaning that has been pushed by the West since the days of the Greeks, right? Through their imperialism, they have forced all of us to believe that until every individual is the focus of the state and every individual has their rights maximized and all of these things, the state is itself illegitimate. Recognize that prior to that, there were communitarian notions of what rights should be. For example, in Africa, we had notions about how the community trumps the individual. So to the extent where the community has ideals, like religious ideals, traditional ideals, those things ought to be privileged over giving rights and freedoms to the individual. So in such a notion, it is totally fine for us to maybe diminish the rights of women, not allow them drive, for example, if that is the will of God. If God's will is ultimately something that is important to the religion that is practiced in that community, the communitarian position believes that we should privilege that practice that the community supports instead of privileging individual actualization. We think this is equally valid as the Western-centric individualist model, right? Ultimately, individualism ultimately leads to like destructive consequences, things like consumerism, things like the overly narcissistic culture that we have in the West and in most new countries that are embracing democracy. We do not think that is objectively better than the communitarian ethos that existed pre-colonialism in Africa, for example, or that existed in the Abbasid Empire under the Caliphate and existed in the Ottoman Empire and many other empires that had historically utilized Islam as their basis for political organization. So on that ideological basis, which is what we should interrogate, on legitimacy, you cannot say individualism, which is pushed by liberal democracy, is superior to communitarianism, which is pushed by a caliphate system which is predicated on Islam. That's very important. Secondly, right, if religion is based on political systems and are bad, right, what is the best thing to do? Should we support the caliphate? We say yes. See, recognize that if this is going to fail, the best thing to do is to allow this to occur. Why is it that nobody is pushing for Marxism today? Because the best way to prove that an ideology is inferior is to allow it to engage in competition in the market space. The reason why nobody pushes for Marxism, the reason why nobody pushes for fascism, the reason why everybody thinks ethno-nationalist ideologies are bad is because they've seen the example of Adolf Hitler. They've seen the example of the USSR fail. So ultimately, the best way to delegitimize an ideology is not to stifle it as you want to get on a position, is to allow that ideology to flourish and have its state and if that state fails, then that is the best way to delegitimize it. We think the consequences of violence and all of this, I'll take in a sec, keep standing closing. The consequences of Islamic jihad and all of these things are so grave that the world must pay this short-term price. If you think that it is so, inherently contradictory a political ideology, then it will fail in a very short time, right? If it fails in a very short time after it has been established because of its internal contradictions, then we think that is a good thing because it should have legitimized the movement going forward, and the world would have had a lasting example like the failure of the USSR, that Islamic caliphate and political system based on Islam have failed. I'll give you the example of the Muslim Brotherhood in a sec.
Legitimacy of a caliphate in Islam has two polar ideological leanings, the Shiites and the Sunnis. You do not endorse one. You can take the neutral ground. Why not defend this?
All right, so in this debate, no one has given a contextualization that the caliphate will be predicated on Sunni orthodoxy or Shia orthodoxy. If the caliphate is to exist in Iran, for example, a predominantly Shia country, it is fine for it to be a Shia caliphate. If it is to be predicated in Saudi Arabia, a predominantly Sunni country, then let it be a Sunni caliphate. We don't really care. The point here is the majoritarian view. If the majority of individuals in the state are Sunni or Shia, let their majority view prevails. Ultimately, right, on the third level, if we anticipate that trauma is going to occur and that is guaranteed, should we prevent it? Now, this is where we analyze the consequences of jihad thus far. Jihad has taken so many lives. This is something that has been occurring since the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We've had several intifadas and many other conflicts that have sprung out of the legitimate agitation for people to be ruled by their religious dictates. We think that the best thing to do ultimately is to allow this system occur. Now, even if there will be some rights infringements, even if some people are going to suffer in the short term, ultimately, if this system occurs and this system is functional, it works, and they are capable of resolving their inherent contradictions, then what happens is these people get the ultimate utility, which is the fulfillment they get from serving their God and doing what they think Allah has decreed, right? But if this system ultimately fails, then this will be a lasting rebuttal that anybody can point to the end of time about how morally bankrupt and impractical a caliphate system is. So there is no better reason for this. Opening only comes to tell you about choice and how the people have chosen, and if you don't give them their choice, what will result. From closing, we give you three things. We tell you that it is very important to interrogate the legitimacy. Secondly, it is very important that ideological expression is allowed because that's the best rebuttal. And finally, the moral responsibility to prevent harm in this case does not hold, because ultimately if we allow that harm to occur, it is what ultimately legitimizes this constant demand and ends the violence. So I've been very proud to propose.